The Vincast, a podcast all about wine, wine culture, and wine people, is proudly supported by Vinous, an iPhone app which recognizes any wine from just the snap of a photo. It really is a fantastic way to utilize a piece of technology that you're carrying around with you all the time in an effort to just keep track of wines you're enjoying. You might want to have again, but also share them with other wine lovers like yourself. So, whilst you are using your iPhone or even any kind of smartphone, really, did you know that you can actually download and listen to the Vincast at your leisure, even pausing and coming back to it later, rewinding? You don't actually have to listen to it through the website. So, all you need to do is go to intrepidwino.com and go to the Vincast section, and you can download essentially as MP3s any of the previous episodes and put them onto your smartphone. But you can also go to the iTunes store and go to the podcast sections and find the podcast there. There's also Stitcher. Another fantastic app you can use on a smartphone is Player FM. And this way you can, take your time listening to a podcast. Obviously, they are, in some cases up to an hour long. So it's not something you can easily do in one sitting. But I do suggest people downloading the podcast and let me know how you actually enjoy it. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Guestbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino. And boy, oh boy, am I very lucky to be absolutely inundated with guests on the podcast at the moment. So I'm actually releasing 2 episodes this week, and who knows, I might release 2 episodes in coming weeks as well. Purely by coincidence, my guests for both episodes this week have been Americans, but only one of them is still based in the US. The other, of course, was Brad Hickey, who was on Tuesday's episode, and he's based in McLaren Vale. Now, I'm really going to put a bit of a shout out here. I've got some really exciting plans for 2015, and I would really love to get as much feedback and help as possible. So if you can help out in any way, I would love to hear from you. So something I'm planning for episode number 50, which is not too far away, is to actually sit down in front of Skype and have listeners have the opportunity to actually call in and chat with me themselves. So if you have any questions about wine, about myself, about any of the guests, or if you just want to share your own wine story, please do let me know. You can contact me on Twitter, on Facebook, or ideally through the website as well. Now, I also would love to hear from any of you who are creative in any way, whether you are graphically inclined and can possibly help out by designing a logo for the podcast. That would be really fantastic. Or if you are musically creative and you might want to help out by writing and recording a piece of music that would be perfectly suited to the podcast, as I would love to really lift the profile and the quality of the podcast in general. Now, if you have any other ideas about ways that I can improve the podcast, I would really love to hear from you. So any of the ways that you can get in contact with me, please do seek me out. So as I mentioned, this is the second episode for this week, and my second guest is Alder Yarrow, who is behind Vinography, which is probably the biggest wine blog in the United States. I had the good fortune of meeting him back in 2012, obviously when I was traveling, and we both visited Domaine Wachau in Austria, which was, I think, the week after Pro Wine. So he was there as a guest of the Austrian Wine Board. And he, of course, dialed in from San Francisco, where he is based. And we had a really fascinating chat about his background and how he approaches wine communication. So I do hope you enjoy the episode. Please let Alder know if you do enjoy the episode, and I will see you on the other side. Alder, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time, especially as I think it's still the weekend where you are.
Yeah, no problem.
So you are probably very well known as Vinography, which is probably one of the biggest wine blogs in the United States. When did you actually start Vinography?
Vinography started. I'm You know what? Actually, I just realized that Vinography's 11th anniversary is today. No,
Ele-
I'm sorry. No, a couple days ago. 11th anniversary,
oh,
couple days ago. So
congratulations.
January, thank you, January 2004.
What do you generally give on the 11th anniversary? Is that
Oh, I don't know.
it's bronze something?
So, yeah, that sounds about right. Bronze Age. No, I have no idea, and as you can tell from my reaction, I actually completely forgot about it.
And you wine is not actually how you derive your primary income. So wine for you is really just it's a passion. Am I right?
It is a passion. It's become a very serious avocation. I like to refer to it as my second job,
Sure.
or my night job. By day, I go to an office here in San Francisco, and I help run an interactive design agency. I'm the chief experience officer of a company called Chibo.
Have you been to Adelaide?
Yes, I have.
Did you see the chain of coffee shops there called Shibo?
No, I haven't. No, I wasn't involved with the company Chibo at the time that I was in Adelaide,
Ah,
so
of course.
it wouldn't have jumped out at me. But no, I don't remember seeing those.
Um, but when you actually like, what was it that actually got you really interested in wine? Was there a particular wine or an experience with wine that kind of got you really interested and sort of eventually set you off to start vinography?
Well, let me tell you the sort of there were little tidbits, little sort of crumbs in the forest for a while as I was growing up. I grew up the son of a hippie single mother, and we really didn't have alcohol in the house at all. In fact, I think we had a bottle of Kahlua that sat in our house for 10, maybe 12 years. And then I think that was the only alcohol that was really ever in our house.
Vintage
Um,
Kahlua.
Vintage Kahlua. Yeah, well, of course, when I turned about 16 or 17, I went after it one day with some friends and it wasn't good. So that was the extent of the alcohol in my house. But I did have a couple experiences with wine growing up. The first was that my father, who I would visit during the summers, lived in Sonoma County, which is where I was born.
Okay.
And when I stayed with him during the summer, it was an opportune time for his parents to come out and visit. Except my father lived on a commune, and it wasn't exactly a place that they liked to hang out. And so to hang out with them, we would often go wine tasting. It was something that, my grandparents were interested in doing, and it was nearby. And so I have very early memories of cavorting around the lawns of, some of Sonoma's well-known wineries, the Rodney Strongs and things like that, or going over the hill to Calistoga and visiting Sterling Vineyards. And so I have memories of visiting wineries, and I do have one or two memories of walking up and sort of wondering what the adults were doing and sipping what they were tasting. And by and large, I didn't care for it, except for one time. I remember tasting a late harvest Sauvignon Blanc and thinking, "Wow, this is pretty good." So
Mm,
that's the.
I'm sure that
Couple,
sugar would have helped.
yes, certainly for an 8, 9 year old palate, but so little snippets like that in my childhood, but really no exposure to wine until I got into college and I did an exchange program that allowed me to study for a couple terms at Oxford. And
Oh, okay.
there I found myself cooking for myself because the food that's served in the colleges there was so atrocious in the mid 90s. It was totally inedible, even to my really Philistine palate. It was horrible.
Well,
And
to be perfectly
so,
honest, I think British food is stodgy at the best of times.
yeah, well, back then it really was bad. It was I described it to people as sort of like this is what I imagine people serve you in prison.
Yeah,
And so I
like
would
the
go
movie
home
Oliver,
and you're
grueling sort
right,
of stuff.
exactly. Except I wouldn't want any more. Uh, I would go back home and make myself, spaghetti with canned, the spaghetti sauce or scrambled eggs or get some ground beef and make some hamburgers or whatever. And I thought to myself, and I don't really care for beer. So I wasn't drinking beer with all my friends at Oxford. And so I thought, well, here I am. I'm this young intellectual, so to speak, in Europe, cooking my own meals. Shouldn't I be having a glass of wine with my dinner? And so I went down to the local, I think it was Oddbins store there in Oxford, and I was way too intimidated to talk to anybody. And so I would scan the bottom shelf where the wines that I could afford lived, and
Sure.
pick them out by the label. And so that's how I came across Mateus, the white Zinfandel of Portugal, and
Mm-hmm.
various other wines like that. And lo and behold, they were interesting to me, and some of them were better than others, and some of them went better with the food that I was eating than others. And that really was the first time I paid any attention to wine and realized that there was this whole universe of different flavors that was out there. And so I came back to the States and graduated college, and sort of was single, didn't have a girlfriend, no pets, was making relatively good money, I thought, at a job right out of college. And so I started spending my pocket money on wine and cookbooks and food and teaching myself how to cook. And I also started taking pretty sort of complete/compulsive notes at that point, on what I was eating and drinking. And, that was sort of the first day of the rest of my life, so to speak. I became your prototypical wine geek who's just really curious and exploratory and wants to taste as much as he can from as far away places as he can.
Now, as far as that kind of first introduction to wine, being in the UK, I can imagine there probably wouldn't be much better places to have that opportunity because, firstly, you got access to all the wines of Europe, and secondly, they're going to be at a reasonably good price. Did you
Well,
did you? Am I wrong?
well, so one, I was poor, like really poor.
Yeah, but
and
the kind of quality you could get for the same amount of money, I would think it'd be a little bit better.
and two, I was stupid. So one of the greatest regrets of my life was I was at Oxford for, I don't know, 7 months or something like that. I joined the mountaineering club there, but if I was really smart, I would have joined the wine society
A
because
mountaineering club in England. I can't
yes.
imagine what the point of that. You'd have to go all the way up to Scotland just to do any mountaineering.
Well, so well, mostly it was rock climbing that we did,
Right. Okay.
and I actually got to see a ton of Great Britain as a result. I mean, we did go to Scotland, we did go to Wales, we went all over. It was great. It was fabulous. But I should have joined the wine society because then I could have been, when it was too rainy to go rock climbing, I could have been drinking the first growths, in the Masters Hall at Christchurch.
Yeah.
But no, so I was poor, and so really, like, I was buying €5, €6 bottles off the bottom shelf at Oddbins, and not, sure, I could have been drinking. Let's see, that was 1994. I could have, had I had a little bit of pocket money, I could have been drinking the first growth. So I could have been drinking, Grand Cru or Premier Cru Burgundy, but it was way too early in my exploration, and I was too intimidated by it all to really, open myself up to, say, even the person working at that shop, and let them turn me on to anything exciting. So unfortunately, I'd have to say the most exciting wine that I would have encountered in those early explorations, would have been a very nice Chianti,
Yeah,
or
or a
something like
Coach or
that.
Road, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you returned to California and you sort of started to explore a little bit more, you had a bit more disposable income to spend on wine. Did you have the opportunity to then go out and start visiting wineries? Because San Francisco is
Sure.
quite conveniently located as far as you've got the Napa Valley, you've got Sonoma, all not much more than an hour away.
Absolutely. So that definitely became something that I started doing. So I went back and explored, in fact, the region that I grew up in. I would spend summers with my dad in Bodega, California, which is right in the heart of what we call the Western Sonoma Coast right now. And so, yeah, I would go up and I'd go taste at Joseph Swan and Hartford Family and all these places up there in Sonoma and the Russian River, and over into Napa and explore there as well. So yeah, that became a fun weekend thing for me to do by myself with friends, or occasionally on a date if I managed to get one.
And when you started to take notes about wines and food, that kind of thing, um, did you sort of decide to sort of start Vinography? Because 11 years ago, a wine blog was a pretty strange concept, I can imagine.
It was.
To be honest, it's still to a certain extent a strange concept now.
Hmm.
Was that kind of part of the idea behind Vinography, was just to kind of keep a record of your notes?
Uh, in a matter, in some ways, yes. To be honest, I had been taking notes pretty assiduously for 10 years by that point.
Wow. Okay.
I had notebooks filled up, little moleskin notebooks and things like that on the shelf, filled up with my notes from various things, trips that I had taken and meals and stuff like that. And at that point, I had become, the wine geek friend, the one that you typically hand the wine list to whenever you go out to eat, the one where, you're standing in the grocery store and you have, their number on your speed dial and you call them up and you say, okay, Alder, I'm looking at these five Zinfandels. They're all the same price. Which one should I buy? That sort
I
of,
know
that
exactly what
sort
that's
of
like.
thing.
Yeah,
I'm
in
sure you
fact,
do.
my girlfriend does get she's quite patient with me, which I really appreciate. But with stuff like Instagram, when we go out for dinner, I want to take a picture of the food, and she has to just
Right.
sigh and go, "Okay, just get it over with," but put the phone away immediately afterwards.
Right. Yeah, so that was so I was that person, and frankly, I was sick and tired of telling my friends over and over again, what the best Merlot under $20 was, or what restaurant to go out to eat at that I had been at recently in San Francisco.
Yeah,
And so you combine that with the fact that I was realizing that these notebooks that I was filling up weren't of particular use to me, in the sense that my handwriting is horrible. I can barely read them once I've actually written things down. And once I filled them up, they were going on the shelf and not really being looked at ever again. And I thought to myself, well, geez, wouldn't it be nice if I could search those notes and things like that? And so the combination of those two things, plus what I was doing with my day job and the degree to which blogs were starting to become important in the business and marketing world,
yeah.
all of that led me to think, you know what? Why don't I kill three birds with one stone, so to speak? Why don't I start a blog about wine? It'll be a place where I can put stuff. It'll be searchable. I can send my friends there to answer these stupid questions that I'm answering over and over again. And I'll learn about blogs in the process and sort of see what the big deal is about this. And so, I did this, and it turns out that, essentially I was one of the first people who ever had that idea to
Sure.
start a blog specifically focused about wine. And so I found myself in the sort of in the right place at the right time. And when you literally could go back. I really don't encourage it, because it makes me look pretty stupid and naive when I first started. But you can go back and read the very first posts that I put up, and they were inane.
Yeah, it's funny. Obviously, I started my blog a few years ago to keep a kind of a journal of my trip around the world, on which obviously
Hmm.
I met you in Austria when we both happened to be visiting Domaine Wachau just after Pro Wine.
When
Um,
we both happened to get lost on the way to Domaine
oh yeah,
Wachau.
I forgot that was so funny, and I was like, "Are you older?" um, and kind of the same thing. It was also a way for people back here at home to keep track of what I was doing and my wine adventures and stuff like that. But I'm really nervous to go back and look at my early writings about wineries I visited. And actually I started in California, and I think, oh my god, even towards the end of my trip, I look at some of my writings and go, geez, I was pretty naive.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Well,
you, you're learning constantly. Um, Now, at the time you sort of were the early days of your wine blog, were any of the sort of major wine publications and critics, were they putting any of their kind of reviews and notes online at all?
no. I think at that point, Steven Tanzer might have had a website, uh, but I'm not sure if you could actually access any of his information online. But you might have been able to. I think Berghound was just getting started. Um, I can't remember when his first issue was. He might not have even started yet. You had people like Neil Martin and Tom Canavan doing stuff online, but they were not big yet, right? They hadn't been sucked into the Wine Advocate and to other publications yet. So really, no. I mean, there was the Spectator online.
Okay.
There was erobertparker.com, so he had a website. But both of those websites you could only get access to if you were a paid subscriber.
Right. Okay.
So there was very little. I mean, I shouldn't say there was very little. I mean, there were definitely established free wine content destinations on the web. Tom Canavan's Wine Lovers page was there. Daniel Rogov, the critic in Israel, had been publishing a bunch of his stuff online for a while. Um, and there were a few other sort of independent destinations, but there wasn't a lot. There really wasn't a lot.
I guess people sort of didn't really see what the potential for that online communication platform was. I would think even then, obviously the real heavy focus was on printed stuff.
Yeah, and I mean the wine industry is always about 5 to 7 years behind any technological curve out there. So blogs were in 2004, blogs were really starting to get hot. We had the Drudge Report, you probably remember that when that became a big deal and people were starting to use that as an alternative source of news as opposed to the big networks. And so you were really starting to see, people paying attention to blogs for the first time, but no, there was nothing in the wine industry.
Yeah, it's funny. I've only just recently discovered House of Cards,
Mm,
and they talk about in the first season. They talk about this. Obviously, it's not a real website. Slugline going, oh, more people going to this. It's like, yeah, but we knew that about 5 years ago at least.
right.
Um, so initially, what was the reaction you were getting from people? Like, did it take a little while for people to kind of discover you and engage with what you were writing? Were you predominantly sort of just writing your impressions of wine? Were you writing any kind of article based stuff?
No, no. I mean, it was very casual. I mean, like a lot of blogs, it started as essentially my own personal wine diary, and I would I put stupid things in there. Like I think one of my first posts was something like, "Look, the Wine Spectator gave the 2001 Piedmont vintage, 98 points. Isn't that cool?" And that was about it,
Yeah.
right? Just stupid stuff like that. But then, I would have a wine and I would write down, a tasting note and what I thought of it, and et cetera, et cetera. And some interesting things happened in the early days. The first thing was that after about 3 or 4 weeks, I found myself writing every day on the blog, and
Wow.
it's clear that it became a creative outlet for me. I did a lot of writing classes in college, and I have a photography degree, and at that time I wasn't taking many photographs. And so I think it just filled a little bit of a creative void in my life that I needed. And so I really enjoyed the process of writing. And so that became a lot of fun. And, 3 or 4 weeks in, I checked the statistics, the analytics on the site. And sure enough, my 15 friends had all come and paid a visit. And so I was like, oh, great, good. These people are actually paying attention when I tell them to go look at the blog instead of pestering me with their questions. And I left it at that. And, I kept up, writing, doing what I was doing. And occasionally people would start commenting, which was very cool, very exciting when somebody actually commented on something I wrote and I didn't actually know who it was. And then I went back and I checked the statistics a couple months later and I nearly lost it because there were thousands of people coming to my site.
Wow.
And I had no idea how they were getting there. That's maybe slightly disingenuous of me. When I built the site, having worked in the internet industry, I knew a thing or two about search engine optimization, and so I built the site to be very Google sticky, right? To show up very well in Google.
Which these days, with such platforms as WordPress and Squarespace, that's functionality they kind of build into it. They tell you, okay, just put some words in, and we'll handle the search engine optimization for you. I would think that back then you really needed to know how to sort of put certain things on the website to make sure that you were going to come up, nice and high on those search feeds.
Yeah, no, it was all very manual. I coded the site myself, et cetera, et cetera. So, definitely. Um, and so that I was sort of taken aback by how many people were coming. And so I immediately started spell checking all of my posts, which I hadn't done up until that point. And very quickly thereafter, sort of resigned myself to, okay, I'm actually writing for an audience here. And what does that mean? And really thinking about, okay, well, let me use complete sentence really and try to make this more, I wanted to pay off the effort and the interest that were bringing people to my website. And so I started taking it much more seriously, as if, I was a columnist and people were listening. And you certainly can trace the evolution of my competence as a writer and my knowledge of wine through those 10 years pretty clearly. I tried to get better quickly and pay attention and do a good job. And in the early few years, when there were only, 4 or 5 wine blogs on the internet, traffic growth was pretty logarithmic. And and yeah, and then I would say probably 11 months in or something like that, I started receiving bottles of wine, um, which
Ah,
was which was just staggering. I mean, I
unsolicited?
unsolicited. So I mean, and that
How did
was,
they
you know,
find out where to send it to? Or did you provide an address or?
yeah. So they had to actually solicit an address.
Okay.
They didn't go stalk me and find out where I live,
Sure.
but uh, yeah, yeah. So I mean, it was a shock that anybody wanted to send me some wine. And I must admit, when I first started the thing, I had my own little fantasy of being a restaurant reviewer and a wine reviewer, and I thought, oh, maybe someday somebody will actually send me some wine for free. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah.
And lo and behold, about a year later, somebody did, and it was very exciting. And that was, the trickle became the stream, became, the floodgates opening. And now, most people laugh when I say it, but now it's a real problem. I mean, I have to very deliberately try to reduce the flow of wine to my door because it's just a ton of samples.
Well, I guess that one of the benefits is that your friends aren't going to be at the wine shop going, "Oh, I'll just call Alder and ask what I should get." They just come to your house and say, "Alder, can I have some free bottles, please?"
I've got all of my neighbors trained to do that now because invariably, there are either duplicates that people send me that need to be given away, or bottles that I've opened that afternoon that there's no way we're going to get through at home.
Mm.
So yeah, I've certainly got the neighbors trained, and I'm a popular person to invite to parties because I usually show up with a case or two of samples in hand to share with everyone.
Mm. Oh no, we ran out of time to go to the liquor store. Oh, that's okay. Just invite Alder. He'll bring some bottles.
Exactly.
Was there someone that you knew of, like I don't know, a well-known wine person who commented on your blog one day that made you go, "Oh my God, that person's reading what I'm writing? That's amazing."
Well, certainly I got a big chuckle out of the fact that I did an April Fool's post 3 or 4 years in, maybe it was a little bit longer than that, where I announced that the Wine Spectator was buying Vinography, um, and that in 20 days I would be shutting the website down, except for people who chose to pay $69 a month or
Oh
something
my
like that.
God.
Um, and first of all, you wouldn't believe the absolute hate mail I got when I did that, because it was a very credible post. It was very difficult to tell that it was satire. Um, and then Marvin Shankin came on and commented and said that was very funny.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. So, yes, that was kind of funny. But, I do remember, Robert Parker has historically had a very antagonistic relationships with bloggers. But I do remember at one point he mentioned on his bulletin board that, most blogs were crap, but that Vinography guy, he's okay. So yeah, so I definitely, there were definitely some surprising moments there where I'm like, oh wow, people are really paying attention to
I
this.
think maybe it was a little bit easier for him to say that, considering that you guys are in pretty much opposite corners of the country. This is
Uh,
he was up in Massachusetts.
yeah, I mean, that certainly doesn't
It's
stop. That
not
certainly
like he's
doesn't
gonna
stop
bump.
him.
It's not like you're gonna bump into him in the street, in the streets of Boston.
Well, that never stopped him from slandering anybody in particular, if he happened to think something untoward of them. But um, yeah, I mean, he looks, I think, at bloggers as some sort of competition, not in the sense that he takes them seriously enough to believe that they're going to steal his readership, but somehow that, and I can't claim to really understand this, that somehow, bloggers are looking to capitalize on his fame by criticizing him, and so he has some sort of argument along those lines, and so he's never been a particular fan. So when he did say that he thought my stuff was halfway decent, I took it as a great compliment.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, there's still ongoing discussions, in the same way between sort of restaurant critics and food bloggers.
Mm, for sure.
There's this really antagonistic relationship between them.
Yeah.
Um, so what was sort of when did Vinography get really massive to the point where I think you became the California correspondent, if that's the right word for Jancis Robinson's Purple Pages?
Not California. She asked me to start writing a column 3 years ago about the American wine scene. My
Right.
job
Okay.
is not to review California wines.
Oh, okay.
I think she might have me do that if I had a lot more time
Sure.
and didn't need to actually make a living. And but I just don't do that. So my job is mostly editorial rather than criticism for her site. But I would say, I starting in about 2006, they came up with the Wine Blog Awards, an organization, this sort of independent organization that Tom Wark founded, along with a guy named Joel Vincent, and I started winning most of those awards.
Yeah.
Yeah, best wine blog, best writing on a wine blog, and I won a lot of them, early on. And as soon as Saveur started doing their their awards, I started winning those awards, and so I won a bunch of awards up front. And I think that largely that was largely the thing that really sort of brought more attention to my site, and then. Yeah, and then sort of in the 2011 to 2013 zone, I Jancis brought me on. I got nominated for a James Beard Award, and that was sort of that was the big, where people really started paying attention in any sort of quote unquote mainstream way, which is you can't really ever say that about wine because wine isn't really mainstream at all. But that was when I started really getting the most attention.
Did you have much of an international following early on, or did it take a little while before you broke out and sort of found more people reading your stuff, in the UK or, even in
Well,
Australia?
I have to say that international was never and has never been a part, a major part of my followership. Early on, there were about 8% of my traffic came from various international places, and now it's only about 20%. It's been so long since I've actually looked at those statistics,
Yeah.
but it's not high. And one of the things that I was quite interested to see is whether that would go up at all once I did start writing for Jancis, and it's barely moved
Okay.
since that. So it's not suddenly like I have exposure to all these Europeans who are now interested in what I have to say, ironically.
Yeah, because Max Allen, who is an Australian a wine writer journalist, he contributes every so often, I think, still to Jancis's website. I must ask him if he kind of had a little bit more of a following, at least over in Europe and the UK, after he started contributing some stuff about Australia to her website. Um, Now, you obviously, when I met you, you were there at the invitation, I guess, of the Austrian Wine
Yeah,
Board. Um,
Austrian Wine Marketing Board. Yeah,
so,
I
so,
mean
so
that's
you've had the opportunity to travel certainly overseas, at the invitation of various entities. What have been some of your really memorable experiences?
Yeah, I mean just thinking back to your earlier question about sort of, when you really started to get attention. I mean, that the getting invited on press trips as a legitimate journalist is certainly a measure of the degree to which people started paying attention to me. And I'm trying to think back what the first trip was that I did, and I don't know that I can remember. I think certainly South Africa was one of the earlier ones in 2008,
Wow.
when I went to South Africa for the Cape Wine festival, and that was that. And this is also answering your direct question. That was certainly one of my more memorable trips. They just do such a fabulous job bringing journalists over there. And I fell in love with the country and the wines and the people, which is precisely, of course, what they want you to do. But yeah, I have been unbelievably lucky in the sort of the kind of perks that have arisen based on the success that I've had with the blog. If I was young and single and didn't have a family and didn't have to, really make much of a living, I could probably be traveling, 2 to 3 out of every 4 weeks on someone else's dime. I constantly get invitations to go on press trips all over the place. So, I've been to Greece, Turkey, Italy, various places in France, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Argentina, Germany, Austria, where else? Hungary, just all over. And it's been wonderful. I'm so lucky to be able to do that. And yeah, so when we met, I was on a week-long, maybe 10-day-long trip, sponsored by the Austrian Wine Marketing Board. That was my first trip to Austria, and just an opportunity for me to, get to know some of the regions there. And so we spent a good deal of time in the Wachau, and went to the falls and down to Burgenland, and sort of did the circuit.
Yeah, and I seem to remember you had a really, really packed schedule. I can't imagine what that would have been like to, it would have taken you like a couple of weeks to recover just from that schedule.
Well, it's very heartening to hear somebody say that, because most of the time when I tell people that I go on these trips and it's actually work, people are like, "Oh yeah, right, work. Someone else is paying for you to eat great food and taste great wine, and they're flying you all over, and you've got a driver and blah blah blah." Yeah, our heart really bleeds for you, Alder. But yeah, it's exhausting. I'm seeing 3, maybe 4 wineries a day. Getting up at 8, finishing at 10 p.m. And essentially interviewing people for 8 hours straight.
Yeah, which you have to take notes, and then you actually have
Yeah,
to log that, and then you actually have to generate some content based on that, because obviously they're not inviting you just just come and have a nice time.
right.
They want you they want you to write about them.
So it is. It's very difficult work, and I don't come back particularly refreshed from those trips, but I am energized by them in the sense that
Mm-hmm.
I love nothing more than exploring a new place and trying wines I've never tried before, and trying great wines, and sort of getting immersed in a culture. It's one of my favorite things to do. So,
And I don't know about you, but whenever I'm out, at a bar, restaurant, or in a shop, and I see a wine, from a region that I've been to, or even better, from a winery I've been to, you kind of you go, oh, and you feel that kind of connection to it.
mhm.
I really enjoy doing that. Particularly when you discover something, and you can kind of you can always carry that with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's what's really interesting to me, and I don't pretend that this is quite the same way for other people, though I suspect there's something to it that's just about the way that we work as human beings. But I really don't have a deep understanding of a wine region until I have visited. There is something about being able to make the connection in your mind's eye between the geography and where you are and how things are situated, and experiencing the climate as you're there, and what's in the glass. There, I certainly attend plenty of tastings that, as various trade groups roll through San Francisco here.
Mm.
And I, for instance, I did that for a couple of years with New Zealand. The New Zealand Wine Commission would come to town, and I would taste a bunch of New Zealand wines, and they'd be great, and I'd write things about them. But I just, when I went to New Zealand and I experienced and sort of like, oh, this is what Marlborough looks like. Oh, this is what Central Otago looks like. Oh, this is what Martinborough looks like. Like, not until I was there did I really feel like I connected at the deepest level with the wines. And so, so all of that surfaces in that moment, as you so aptly describe, when you see that wine on the list and you're like, oh yeah, that.
But ultimately, it really is about context.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Now, one of the things that I really like about your approach to wine communication is it's very heavily geared towards education. It's about empowering people to kind of discover their own understanding of wine. Discover what they like, that kind of thing. And that's, I'm assuming that's kind of, in your own way of improving the way that you could assess wines. You developed the cards which had the kind of, it was almost like a cheat sheet as far as flavor compounds and elements of the wine, and a little bit different to the flavor wheel.
Yeah, well, so I have a love-hate relationship, and mostly hate relationship, with the aroma wheel. So obviously,
Right.
as you get a certain way into your appreciation of wine, and that thing comes up, right? You learn about it in whatever way you learn about it, whether you see it sitting for sale for $6, at some wine store counter, or you come across somebody mentioning it in something that you read, and that thing's totally befuddling to me. On the one hand, I recognize the unbelievable value of providing somebody a lexicon or a taxonomy of different flavors and aromas of wine because of the ways that our brains work. And we can get into this in more detail in a moment about why having those words on the page are so useful. But I could never understand how anybody could actually use that wheel in a way that was particularly helpful, in the sense that I had no idea why it was round. It was really big and wouldn't fit in my wallet. And the proximities and relationships between the various elements on the wheel made no sense to me. And then to top it all off, I was tasting and smelling a ton of different things in wine that didn't appear on that wheel. And
Yeah.
so I thought, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so essentially, I created my own. And my criteria were, it had to fit in my damn wallet. It had to have as many flavors and aromas on it as I could fit. And, it definitely didn't have to have this weird concentric circle pseudo set of relationships that, to my mind, didn't make any sense or help me in any way, shape, or form at all. So I created that wine card, and, I did it in English and blah, blah, blah. And then I think somebody offered to translate it to Spanish for me. And I thought, oh, that's great. Cool. Yeah, go ahead. And then, basically over the following years, eventually somebody would find it, who spoke some other language, and they would offer to translate it for me into that language. And that's how I ended up with 7 languages. And I actually have the Chinese version now that I have to do as well. So soon I'll have it in 8 languages. So that, uh, that is a very useful tool for somebody who's just starting out tasting wine. It was for
Absolutely.
me. It was for me, because our brains are actually literally not structured to make connections between language and smell and taste. It's the wiring is different for those two sets of senses.
I think even for very experienced wine professionals, there can often be a big disconnect and a little bit sort of misleading. I made a note the other day about a pasito wine. It's sitting in a barrel and it's not full, so there's going to be a bit of reduction. And so I used the word, very reduced, and they thought I meant it was reductive.
Mm.
So just subtle differences in language can be such a minefield for people, even again, even for wine professionals. But that one of the things that I think is most valuable, and it's the same reason that I travelled and went to wine regions and saw wines in the context was there's so much more, I guess, value, such a stronger kind of connection with visual cues, and I'm guessing that's sort of part of the reason behind you developing this fantastic book I actually have in front of me, The Essence of Wine. And obviously, with your photographic background, I'm sure that kind of played into it as well.
Yeah. So absolutely. I mean, that book, the project that led to that book grew out of that intersection between that aroma card itself and the value of just thinking through those different flavors and aromas, my own sort of visual tendencies. I'm a very visual person. With my photography degree and blah blah blah. And also, the my appreciation for what really lies at the core, certainly in the beginning of my appreciation for wine, which is to say that the reason that wine was magical to me at the beginning, and to a certain extent still is, has to do with the fact that you stick your nose in the glass and you never know what it is you're going to smell,
Mm.
and the idea that you could smell jasmine, the flower jasmine, or you could stick your nose in and smell chocolate, or you could taste passion fruit in a wine that's made just from grapes and air and sunlight and time and maybe a little oak, is magical to me. And those flavors are so vivid in the glass that the word on the page doesn't do them justice. And so
Yeah.
I thought to myself as I was making those cards, I thought, this little tool is super useful. I'm really glad I'm doing this, but wouldn't it be cool to just linger on one of these flavors for a moment and talk about it and think about it and see it? Because each one of these things, whether I'm writing down cucumber or passion fruit or whatever, each one of these things is a beautiful, beautiful object and part of the bounty of this life that we get to live. And wouldn't it be cool to have this little project to celebrate each of these individual flavors and aromas and give them their day in the sun, so to speak? Um, and and so I came up with the idea of this project. And one of the other things that fed into it too was this idea that, as somebody who tastes thousands of wines a year, like, I get to taste some pretty amazing things in the glass, and things that I know that, sometimes my wife or other friends that I'm talking with wine about haven't encountered. The idea that a wine could taste like lychee, just for a lot of people, is like, you're kidding. What
Mm.
wine tastes like lychee,
Mm.
or they've never had a wine that tastes like chocolate. And so part of it for me was also, you can taste those things in the glass, and you just have to find the right wine to do it. And wouldn't it be great to show people and point people to the wines that will broaden that sensory landscape that they have, and increase the geography that they have in their minds for the flavors and aromas of wine. And so all those things sort of made me think that this project would be a really good idea. And what I had to do was find somebody who could actually photograph it, because I have a photography degree, but the kinds of photographs that I can and do take tend to be of old abandoned buildings and detritus and rotting things, and black and white Ansel Adamsy kinds of landscapes, and not gorgeous, luscious, full color studio still life food photography. And
Mm.
so I needed to find somebody that could do it. And I did find somebody, and interestingly, um, uh, I think she was based in Australia. Are you familiar with the blog What Katie Ate? Um,
It sounds vaguely familiar.
I think she's either in Australia or in New Zealand, but she is one of the greatest food photographers I've ever seen. And I wrote, as soon as I saw her photographs, I was like, no, this is the gal. Yeah, she lives in Sydney. Um, and I loved her photographs. Um, Her name is Katie Quinn Davies, and so I wrote to her immediately, and I said, hey. Uh, I've got this idea, I have this project, and I never heard from her. And so I was like, well,
Oh,
okay. And, I wrote to her several times. And I think at that point she had just been discovered. And she was
aha.
in the middle of writing a book, doing a book. And so I'm sure she didn't have time for this kind of stupid free pro bono project. And so I was like, oh, rats. And so then, I kept my eye out. And then I found another photographer who was just as good. And she was the photographer for my friend Joyce Goldstein's a book. And so Joyce is a chef and a restaurant consultant and writer in San Francisco. And so I asked Joyce for an introduction to Lee Beisch, um, which she gave me. And I reached out to Lee and I said, "Hey, Lee, I've got this idea. You don't know me, but I know Joyce and blah blah blah." And she said, "Oh, that would be great." And off we went.
Yeah, well, it's really beautiful, but very striking. I didn't realize this, but obviously, I can see immediately that kind of that food photography sort of influence on the photos. It's beautiful, and I like that you both. It's very simple, a simple way of describing the kind of the characters, but there's so much more kind of life and emotion that you're connecting with them. I like that kind of, because for me, um, drinking wine or tasting wine, there has to be an emotional element to it. You cannot completely divorce yourself from looking at something and thinking about personal experience, that kind of thing. And I like that even looking at just a fruit and sort of talking about its origin and how it's revered in parts of the world, that kind of thing really does just add so much more to the experience of just the simple act of sort of finding a fruit-based compound in a wine. And I'm interested because for each kind of characteristic, you have examples, wines from around the world. What was the kind of the idea behind that? How did you kind of select those specific wines for one of those compounds?
Sure. Well, so the process went something like this. I keep, as I said, I taste thousands of wines a year, and they all go into most of them go into a database, a big spreadsheet or a series of spreadsheets that I've amassed over the years, and so I can search for keywords, right? So we're gonna do the lemon shot. And so I go into my Excel spreadsheets and I type in lemon,
Uh,
and I see what wines pop up.
that's
Um,
kind of what I thought it was.
yeah. So that's the beginning, right? So
Yeah.
I've got, all right. Well, so I've got 900,000, 2,000 wines where I've used the word lemon, and so then I sort of say, all right, well, they have to be good scoring wines that
Hmm.
I actually liked,
Hmm.
and so that narrows it down. And then they have to be wines that are commercially available to people. So the fact that I tasted, 1968, Pouligny Montrachet, that tasted like lemon oil, I'm not going to put that in the book because nobody's going to be able to get that. Um, and they had to be relatively recent vintages, in the sense that what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to recommend a wine that only tasted like something, after it was 10 years old or 20 years old. And so again, we're narrowing the field here, narrowing the field here. And then it was very important for me, because that's just one of the great things about the wine world, is that there be a great amount of geographic distribution of the wines. And so I tried to choose wines that were from all over the world, from as many different places as I could, that were great, that tasted or smelled of that thing in a fairly dominant way,
Mm.
and that people could buy online. And so the combination of all those factors led me to a much, smaller subset of wines, as you can imagine. And so those were the ones that I ended up recommending for each of the aromas and flavors.
I have to say, I think it's probably one of the best sort of for someone who is maybe starting out with wine or can find the kind of the idea about finding different elements. Looks at a tasting note and goes, "How are you finding all these things?" I think this is probably one of the best resources for people out there, and particularly with those beautiful visual cues. It is really strengthening that understanding of how a wine can be broken down and assessed. Um, speaking of commercially available. Can people order the book online?
Yes, it is currently sold out, but
Okay.
the second printing, which is great. I'm thrilled that I was actually able to sell all the copies that I printed first. So the second printing is literally on a boat from China. That's going to dock in Los Angeles, I think, end of next week. And so starting about February 1st, they will be available to ship again. I am taking back orders in this time that it's sold out on my website, and people are buying them in anticipation of it being available again. So yes, they're available on my website. For anybody who wants the ebook version is available in the iTunes store as well as on Amazon.com.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want the physical book, you got to go to Vinography.com and click on the page there that sells them, and I'll have it shipped out to you once it's available. Unfortunately,
as you did for me, and I was
yeah.
super excited when I actually got it in the post, and I also do really appreciate you giving me a bit of a shout out as a backer on the Kickstarter.
Oh no, absolutely. Anybody who contributed significantly to the Kickstarter thing, that's I gotta say thank you. I mean, you and all those other folks who gave me money, the idea that you didn't know if you were ever going to get anything, right? I could have run off to Bermuda, but it's I couldn't have done the project without folks like you, and so it was hugely valuable to me to have your support, and so that's great. And
I was thrilled to be able to support in some small way.
Yeah, well, and just for any of your Australian listeners, I will ship the book to Australia, but I learned the hard way that it's actually a lot more expensive than I thought.
Unfortunately, it is. We are a little bit isolated down here.
Well, just the book weighs almost 4 pounds, and shipping anything that heavy overseas is just outrageous. I mean, it's literally like $40 to $45 a book for me to ship that thing. It's I sort of blew my mind when I realized that.
And yet, in spite of that, people still order stuff out of the US through Amazon because it still ends up being cheaper. Than buying it here. But anyway, obviously the website is vinography.com, and people can follow you on social media.
Mm-hmm.
You're just at Vinography on Twitter and Instagram, that sort of thing.
On Instagram,
Alder Yarrow.
I'm at Alder Yarrow, ALDERYARROW. But on Twitter, I'm on at Vinography. I'm also on Delectable for anybody who uses that app. You can sort of follow along with what I'm drinking and enjoying, and then you can also find me on Facebook as well.
Fantastic. Again, Alder, I really do appreciate you making some time for me. Thank you very much for being on the Vincast, and hopefully, before too long, we actually get to bump into each other again, IRL in real life.
I would really enjoy that. We didn't get a chance to share nearly enough wine together when we bumped into each other that rainy day in Austria. So I look forward to it, and it was my great pleasure.
Thanks
I enjoyed
again.
the conversation.
All right. Thanks, Alder.
Sure.
Well, thanks, guys, for listening to another episode of the Vincast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you let myself and Alder know if you did. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at IntrepidWino, and you can follow the podcast on Twitter at the Vincast. You can visit me on Facebook, facebook.com/IntrepidWino, and best of all, you can come to intrepidwino.com, which has not only all of the previous episodes of the Vincast, but also lots of different writings I've done in the last few years. I really do look forward to hearing from you more. Jump onto iTunes, Stitcher, Player FM, subscribe to the podcast so you can download them as soon as they go up, and I would love to hear from you with a rating or a review. I hope you enjoyed both of this week's episodes. I've got lots and lots more coming up, really exciting. I have been James Scaresbrook, aka the Intrepid Wino, and this has been the Vincast. Until next time, bye.